Okay, so 2 days ago we did adding rational numbers, and the last lesson was subtracting rational numbers. And now we're going to split 2.4 is multiplying and dividing rational numbers, and I'm going to split it into two different lessons. So today we're reviewing just multiplying rational numbers. So let's remember rational numbers are going to be either positive or positive or negative, and they could either be fractions, decimals, or integers. So lots of different things going on here. But we already know all the rules, and we're just applying different rules that we know now. So let's look at number 7 here. So number 7, we have an integer here, -1, and it's being multiplied by 4/5. We know they're multiplied together because they're right next to each other like this. That's why they put the parentheses in there. Or else it would just be -1 and 4/5. Now we know those are two separate numbers. So we have -1 times 4/5. Now we need to turn this into a fraction. -1, anytime we want to turn an integer into a fraction, we just put it over 1. So this is really just -1 over 1 times 4 over 5. When we're multiplying fractions, we just multiply across the top. We have -4, and we multiply across the bottom, 5. Now, if you'll notice, we started with -1 times 4/5, and we ended with -4/5. Anytime we multiply anything by -1, effectively all we do is change its sign. So it was 4/5, now it's -4/5. But if you just follow the multiplication rules, it works out anyway. Look at this one here. Number 8, another thing multiplied by -1. So if we look at it, now it's -1 times -3.5. When we're all done, I'll bet this ends up being +3.5. Because whenever we multiply by -1, we just change the sign of whatever it is we're multiplying. But let's work it out anyway. So we have -1 times -3.5. Let's turn them both into fractions. This would be -1 over 1, and this would be -6/7 over 2. Now we do not need common denominators. That's only when we're adding and subtracting fractions. Here we just get to multiply across the top for the new numerator and multiply across the bottom for the new denominator. So -1 times -7 is +7. Same sign, positive, when we're multiplying and dividing. And 1 times 2 is 2. I'm going to turn this back into a mixed number. 2 goes into 7 3 times with 1 left over. And we end up with +3.5, just like we knew we would. Number 9, we're again multiplying by -1. So we know what's going to end up here. We're just going to change the sign of this number, going from -0.25 to +0.25. But let's work it out. Number 9, we have a -0.25 times a -1. Well, we're multiplying here, so 1 times 5 is 5, 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 0 is 0. 2 numbers behind the decimal up in the factors, so 2 numbers behind the decimal in the product. Same sign, so our product is positive 0.25, which is what we said we were going to get, and we were right. Whenever we multiply by -1, we keep the number, we just change its sign. Well, then we've got some division. We'll be looking at these tomorrow. But here's the review on the multiplication. So the first one here is number 22, -1 over 4 times -4 over 3. Now I always like to simplify before I multiply. It makes it easier in the end. 4 goes, remember, simplify before we multiply means we can look at something on top over here and something on bottom over here. Or something on top here and something on bottom here. Well, nothing goes into 1 and 3 evenly, other than 1, which won't help us. But something goes into 4 and 4 evenly. 4 does. 4 goes into 4 one time. 4 goes into 4 one time. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Now I go back and check my sign rule. Same sign. So my answer is going to be positive. Positive 1/3. Number 23. I have 5 over 6 times, I don't see a multiplication symbol, but remember they're right next to each other. That implies multiplication, times negative 8 over 15. Well, I'm going to simplify here. 5 goes into 5 one time, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. And 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. 1 times 4 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. Now, I go back and check my sign rule. I've got opposite signs. So my answer is going to be negative. I could have seen that here with this negative, but when I simplified, sometimes you lose track of that negative. It's kind of tiny and it gets lost in the mix of things. So go back and check your original problem to make sure you're including the correct sign. So negative 4/9. Now, if you didn't simplify before you multiplied, you would have gotten 40 over 90. 40 over 90, which would have, negative 40 over 90, of course, which would have simplified down to negative 4/9. I like to simplify before I do my multiplication. Number 24. Negative 2 times negative 1 1/4. Well, I'm going to turn these both into, sorry, my multiplication sign looks more like a decimal hanging out down there. Okay. I'm going to turn them both into improper fractions. So negative 2 becomes negative 2 over 1. And 4 times 1 is 4 plus 1 is 5 over 4. Negative 5 over 4. I can simplify here. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 goes into 2 once. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2. Same sign, so my answer is positive. And I'm going to turn that back into 2 1/2. Number 25 takes us, still fractions. One more fraction problem here. 25. Negative 3 1/3 times negative 2 7/10. Well, turning them both into improper fractions, I get negative 10 over 3 times negative 27 over 10. And that looks like, wow, I got 270 over 30, but if I simplify before I multiply here, 10 goes into 10 once and 10 goes into 10 once. And 3 goes into 3 once and 3 goes into 27 9 times. This just becomes 1 times 9 is 9, 1 times 1 is 1. 9 over 1, which equals 9. Same sign, so my answer stays positive. Positive 9 was the answer to number 25. Moving into the decimals now. Remember when we multiply with decimals, just like when you learned to multiply with decimals in 4th or 5th grade, you just multiply as if the decimals were not there. Let's see if I can put that in there. That'll help me out. Absolutely. So I've got 0.4, and I'm multiplying by negative 0.03. I do not need to line up the decimals here, but they did end up lining up. That didn't matter. I go 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. And now I've got 3 numbers behind my decimal. And I need 3 numbers behind my decimal here. I could, if you think, I just want 3 numbers, and you put a 0 back here, that's not an important 0 once I put my decimal here. I could annex a bazillion zeros back here. It doesn't change anything. I need to put a 0 up front here, and now my decimal, 0.012. Different signs, so my answer is negative. Different signs, so my answer is negative 12 thousandths. For number 27, I've got a negative times a negative, so I know my answer will be positive, but I have negative 0.05 times negative 0. I'm going to put it over here just so I'm not lining up the decimals on purpose. Okay, 5 times 5, 25. 5 times 0 is 0 plus 2 is 2. 3 numbers behind the decimal. I need 3 numbers behind the decimal. Of course, I have to put it out front here. 0.025, same sign, so it stays positive. 25 thousandths. Number 28. Now I have 3 numbers that I'm multiplying together. Of course, I can only multiply 2 at a time. Because it's all multiplication, I can actually multiply these in any order I wish, but we're just going to take them in order here. I have negative 8 times 0.09. 9 times 8 is 72. Only 2 numbers behind the decimal, so only 2 numbers behind the decimal. And I've got 1 positive and 1 negative, so my answer is negative. I can't think I'm done yet, though. I have not yet multiplied by the negative 0.5 factor right here. So now I will times negative 0.5. 5 times 2 is 10. 35, 36. 3 numbers behind the decimal, so 3 numbers behind the decimal. Same sign, so it's positive. Positive 360 thousandths, which is the same as just positive 36 hundredths, because that 0 is not needed. Both of those would be correct. This is probably a little more simplified, though. Number 29. Again, 3 different factors I'm multiplying together. The nice thing about multiplying fractions is we can just multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So 5 over 6 times negative 4 1/2 times negative 2 1/5. And I'll put these in parentheses just so the dot and the negative don't get confusing. I'm going to turn them all into fractions. 5 over 6 is already a fraction. 9 over 2 is what this would become, negative of course. 11 over 5 is what this one becomes, negative of course. And now I have, I can simplify before I multiply, big time here though. 5 over here goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 5 once. 3 goes into 6 twice. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 1 times 3 equals 3 times 11 equals 33. 2 times 2 is 4 times 1 is 4. And now I look and I think, oh man, what sign does that get? I've got different signs because I've got a positive here and some negatives here. And well, do the negatives win out because there's more No. Remember, if there are an even number of negatives, my answer is positive. And I have 2 negatives, so my answer is positive. So positive 33 over 4. 4 goes into 33 8 times with 1 left over. So 8 1/4. Last problem is that number 30 right there. And for number 30, it's got parentheses, which are very important when we're doing this. It's negative 1 2/3 raised to the 3rd power. And what that means is I'm multiplying this by itself. Use that as a factor 3 times. So it's negative 1 2/3 times negative 1 2/3 times negative 1 2/3 again. I'll turn all of those into fractions, 3, 4, 5. So negative 5/3 times negative 5/3 times negative 5/3. I can't simplify anything on the top and the bottom, so I'll do 5 times 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25, and 25 times 5 is 125. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27. I have 3 negatives. 3 is an odd number. So I have an odd number of negatives, which means my answer is going to be negative. 27 goes into 125 4 times with 17 left over. So I have negative 4 and 17 27ths with a big red line going right down the middle, which looks horrible, but oh well, you know what it means. Excellent. Well, that's our review for multiplying fractions, multiplying whole numbers and fractions, multiplying decimals, and multiplying with 3 factors. And now you can go, and when you go to look at the lesson for journal page 40, you're looking at these numbers. So when you're looking at journal page 40, J40, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 7, and 10. Tomorrow we'll look at the other ones when we're doing the division of rational numbers, but for today, 1, 2, 3, 7, and 10 on journal page 40 from way back at the beginning of the year. All right, good luck.